Hello, my name is Travis Lindsay. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship here at Cal State Fullerton, angel investor, and today I am interviewing Jason Khoo. He is an alumni of Cal State Fullerton, marketer extraordinaire, and I'll pass it off to him so he can introduce himself.
Hey guys, I'm Jason. I am, like Travis said, alumni of Cal State Fullerton. I was heavily involved in the entrepreneurship department and center, so big fan. Just to go into my background, when I graduated from Cal State Fullerton, I started a digital marketing agency, which I eventually sold about 4 years out. And right now I am the founder of an agency called Zupo, where we help, companies, deploy long-term SEO strategies. And so we help, from big engineering companies all the way to, small tech startups. And we just kind of assist them in their pursuit for SEO success.
And Jason, right before our interview, we probably should have just kept that part in, but we had a great conversation about stoicism, and I think you were talking about Taoism. So one of our favorite authors is Ryan Holiday.
Mm-hmm.
He was the marketing director, I think it was for American Apparel.
Yeah.
The first time I read one of his books was Trust Me, I'm Lying. Have you read that book?
So I have always meant to read that one, but I have not.
Dude, I mean, it is a great book. One of the great pieces of advice I got from it was that when you are marketing and if, for example, you want to get your stories placed in the New York Times or something like that, don't just reach out to the New York Times, but find out where the New York Times gets their stories from, and then keep on repeating that process until you get down to a level that you can actually access, and then reach out to those people and start building up the connections in that kind of marketing ecosystem, so that eventually you'll be able to get your stories up to that higher level of organization. But that was a really interesting one.
That's so that's why I got to read that book, because when it comes to SEO, a lot of our work entails link building, which is I feel like the average person knows SEO entails link building. And once you get into link building, you need to start driving links from really high quality websites, and for example, New York Times or Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes. And what I have found is that my average client really over exaggerates what it takes to be on these magazines. But these publications and like you said, the New York Times, they're hunting for stories, because it is a lot of work to create content. And I feel like people think that they need to found a startup, sell it for millions, if not $1 billion, and then the Forbes will talk about them, when the bar to get into these publications, if you are smart, a little creative, and you understand what editorials kind of want, it doesn't take as much as you think at times.
No, absolutely. And one of the things that we see with entrepreneurs that we work with is that they think that they need to start a business that is fully thought out. They're going to need $1 million to start the business. I mean, at least $1 million to start the business. And they kind of think that they should start off kind of in the big leagues right away. When the reality is that you need to pay your dues a little bit. You need to start kind of at the bottom, right? And you have to build your way up.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is, what I will say as well is that a lot of people, they understand when you're younger, you got to pay your dues. But a lot of people, when they're young, they don't want to pay their dues. But there's another thing that I find valuable, is that when you don't start in the big leagues, in this, if we're still using this metaphor, if you work in the minor leagues, which is some garage business that doesn't have high revenue, but you're still doing business, you make a lot of mistakes that you'll be thankful for later you made at a smaller scale than at a bigger scale. Even to this day, I made a lot of mistakes in my first company, where I'm almost really happy that I made them at the time I did, because if I think at the scale of what some founders, I can see people making those exact same mistakes, and let's say 20% of $250,000 company is not that much, but if you have millions in funds and you make that same mistake at 25%, you could kill your entire business, and the fall is much farther.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So I think you see that in situations, maybe like in family businesses, where you have somebody who all of a sudden they're 25 years old and they're thrust to the leadership of this family business that's been around for 3 generations, and they decide to make this huge bet on something, and if it fails, it takes the whole company down. Now,
Hmm.
if they had started out at as the box boy or in shipping and receiving or something like that, they make a mistake there, it's not a huge deal. It's contained. Yeah, learning how to make mistakes, or that mistakes are a part of life, I think is an invaluable lesson that most people just, I don't know, they haven't learned well enough, I don't think.
Yeah, and I do want to take one more. I want to bring up something that to take it back to the trust me I'm lying thing, just to kind of give people who might be listening, if especially if you're a student, a real life example that happened to me. When I was at Cal State Fullerton, I found a resource that journalists use to find stories. And when I was at Cal State Fullerton, I actually got picked up by an author who was looking for like high achieving students and their hacks and tips for getting good grades and like what they did. And I submitted an entry of like what I used to do. And the author reached out to me and said, "Hey, I put you in the book. Oh, and by the way, I'm syndicated by Forbes, so you're gonna be featured on Forbes." And I was like, "What?" Like I just submitted some entry for some authors. So I think like that's a real life example of like I did not start a company yet. I had not begun anything. I was simply a student, but I was at the right like board where a journalist was looking for something. And when I submitted, I got into Forbes without needing to found or sell a company.
Yeah, and I just I was telling you a little bit before the we started this that I just got done with an interview with Darren Jones. He works at Walt Disney Company. He's an executive director over there, and one of the things he kept on hitting on was just getting involved, be involved as much as you can, um, for the right reasons, right? Because you're passionate about what you're doing, and it fits with who you are. So one of the upsides of that is things like what you were just talking about. You never know what kinds of good things are going to happen from your connections with people, and that's not why you should do it. You should do it for good reasons, altruistic reasons. But you could reach out to somebody, and then you're all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, you're featured in Forbes.
Correct. Correct. Yeah,
Yes.
100%.
Yeah, and so one of the other things we talked about before this was stoicism,
Hmm.
and one of the big lessons I've learned from it, and I'll take a step back. I started getting interested in stoicism. I think while I was in the MBA program. I was taking a leadership class, and I was learning about different leaders, and I was doing a project on General Patton, and along the way, I started learning about General James Mathis. And one of the books that he, kept on him all the time was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and it's kind of like the cornerstone of Stoicism today, at least as far as I can tell. And one of the things that I really get from it, and I've read it multiple times, is that you really need to focus on things that you actually have control over, and everything that you don't have control over, uh, you can't let that like beat you down. So as a professor, an investor, entrepreneur, I think that's a huge lesson to learn and to really try to embody with what you do. Um, and you know a lot about Stoicism and Taoism.
Hmm.
Would you like to talk about some of that stuff, some of the lessons you've learned from that?
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. General Patton is a classic example of a stoic. If you like stoicism, you like General Patton. That's kind of like the pair. Yeah, I'm really into I'm like know about stoicism because I read a lot of Ryan Holiday's books, who we mentioned earlier, and I think that has helped lead me into some Buddhist and Taoist books. But I think I'm right with you there, which is like if you're like in business, there is so much that will stress you out, and in the moment, like you just feel like it's warranted. Like, oh, is a client going to leave because they haven't sent me an email in 2 weeks? I haven't been to get a hold of them. Is it because they're going to drop us soon, or is it because they made some mistake? Or and there's like a countless like situations that can happen where emotionally you can fly off the handle. And what I kind of like about like when I've read the Stoic books or when I've read the like Taoist books or Buddhist books is, like I feel like business is a lot of emotional energy and using it wisely. And when you let little things set you off, you start making poor decisions. You start letting your temper get the best of you. And soon, like your day to day becomes much more taxing. And like you might even start developing like a distaste for it. So I think what's really beneficial about like, stoicism, and I recently in the last month while we've been at the stay at home order is I've been reading a lot of Taoist and Buddhist books. It's really like you are a boat on the ocean and the waves will kind of be the way they are, and the best you can do is not complain about the waves. The best you can do is manage the waves to the best of your ability. And so the less you like complain about otherworldly factors, like the better you will be able to handle it. Because if you spend all your time like worrying about how the waves are going to like capsize your boat or they're like pulling you in the wrong direction, you can't control waves, the same Poseidon kind of thing. Like you really only control one minute part, which is the boat. And you should spend all your energy on focusing on what you can, which is essentially that boat. And the boat and water is a very common Taoist philosophy, but in my readings of meditations by Marcus Aurelius and these, the Tao Te Ching or the Buddhist books, they all have a really similar line of like, stop looking outside at other figures and complaining about them. Look inside, because it might truly be how you're reacting, nothing about them.
Yeah, and there's a lot about keeping your ego in check, because yes. I think one of the reasons why, like, okay, here's an example for me. At the beginning of this stay-at-home order, I was reading everything I could get my hands on, my eyeballs on, about the coronavirus, and just reading it, and I was taking hours a day. And eventually I stopped myself and realized, hey, there's nothing I could do about this, but I do have a responsibility for all the other things that I actually have control over. So teaching my classes, doing my work with the Center for Entrepreneurship, doing my work as an angel investor, being there for my family and stuff like that. And so I basically just deleted all those links. I still maybe look at them for like 5-10 minutes a day, because I think, being informed is important for what I do, but I don't need to be immersed in that sort of stuff. So I just kind of realigned back towards the things that I actually am responsible for, and just focus more on that stuff.
It's funny. I totally agree with you there. And I think that I came to the same point because of, Stoic, Taoist, readings, is that like, how many things in our life do we let control us that are not in our control, but we think we have to know? Like, I think another Stoic fan is Tim Ferriss. And Tim Ferriss talks about in the 4-hour work week. And I'm one of those people that actually am a big fan of Tim Ferriss. He can be hot or cold with a lot of people, but I'm actually a big fan. And he talks about in the 4-hour work week, like limiting the amount of like things coming into your brain. And so he talked, and the classic example is like social media, or like the news. He talks about how like there is like this societal pressure that we have all in ourselves, or this guilt that like as an intellectual who went to college, or just a citizen of the community, you should know what's going on. But it like you said earlier, like what can I actually do? Like unless I am going, and I really look up to people like this, like Tam Nguyen, another alumni at Cal State Fulton. He's going out there and contributing and donating things to people. If you can do that, that's great. Or if you're like someone like myself, or I guess yourself, Travis, where we still have our day-to-day jobs and we have limited resources on how much we can assist, people on the front line. There is no like, what benefit is there to read, scary headlines and just debate them at the table, or have arguments with people that, no, I read this article and so said, well, this article said this. There is no value to that. And then when that happens, like you start actually bringing down the important things in life. Like what I've found is that like if I let social media or these news bring me down a bit, my mood will be down running my business, how I interact with my loved ones, and therefore I will be more irritable. Business won't be as good. I'll make worse decisions, and therefore I'm just making it worse for myself. And at the end of the day, I can try and blame the article or the news, but at the end of the day, I'm the one that chose to consume it and read it. So I'm kind of with you right there. And for this stay-at-home order, I have not watched or read anything. Of course, I know to stay at home. I know like what I'm supposed to do, but beyond like the daily like ticker count, I don't really look at that.
Yeah, so for the leadership class that I teach, we had to change things drastically. So I got rid of the second midterm, and I've asked my students to write an essay on the leadership response to the coronavirus. And I came up with that idea while I was looking through all the information. I was kind of immersing myself in that. Now I'm thinking, maybe that probably wasn't the best thing to do, because I'm sure our students are, looking at this information all the time as well. And it's probably just going to make them freak out a little bit more as they read deeper into it, see where the leadership failures have been and what happened there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Real quick, yeah, I wanted to say, actually, I think I might disagree. I think there's still value in actually having your students do that, because I don't think like reading about the virus is a bad thing. I think like if you're going to read about it, have a purpose of what you're going to do with it. So like, for example, like you read about General Patton, reading war and death counts isn't going to really make you a better person every day. But if you read about specific leadership about, General Patton and what he did at the time that he was fighting, and look at the adversity and what he did to handle it, there's value in that. So I think I would say that I think there's a lot of value in having students read at least they are forced to focus in on the leadership response, not the deluge of stats. Like they have to focus in on what they're looking for, which I think is way more beneficial and actually a value add rather than being sucked into it. Because then if you don't have a purpose, then you just let them dictate. It's like the waves analogy I gave earlier. If you don't have a purpose and you just jump in there, you're letting the waves just take you anywhere, and you're not really doing anything. You're just letting it almost like take you anywhere.
Well, hell, now I'm even more glad we did this interview, because that seems completely reasonable to me, and I feel better about what I did.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because like if you think about like we like all like Western leadership is like really based on, Eisenhower, Hamilton, not Hamilton, sorry, wrong person. General Grant, Patton. These are all war generals, but like death counts aren't valuable. It's how they responded in the situations at hand, and that's very stoic.
Right. All right.
Yeah.
So for the last couple minutes here, I think we could probably talk about this for another hour or two, but let's keep it short so that people will listen to it. The last thing about stoicism that I really like is that once you start removing the emotions from your decision-making process, it helps you really focus on your ROI. What are the most important things to do? And I think that that's very helpful for entrepreneurs, business people in general, and just everybody in their day-to-day life. Have you seen it the same way? Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, I'll give some examples based on, this is actually less from myself, but more from my peers. I am, I have a couple of friends who they've gone through funding rounds, or they've contemplated going through funding, or at the very minimum, they have thought about starting a company. Like take any of those examples. And what I have found is like one of the most strenuous things I have seen in my peers is that when they're looking for funding or when they're trying to start a company, they're so enamored with trying to do everything right, and so they're doing the right thing of going out there and getting advice and getting valuable insight from people. But what you often find in anything, but especially entrepreneurship, is every piece of advice you're given is usually also packaged in with high philosophical beliefs. So people are like, the classic example is you shouldn't get funding. You should never give equity of your company to anybody. Don't take other people's money. Or the other side is why would you start a business with your own money? You should get funding so you can scale faster, and therefore, you can have 50% of whatever the pot may be, because 50% of $0 is zero, right? And even as something basic as that, I have seen people, be like torn almost like mentally asunder because they have everyone giving them advice in a 360-degree variable, or I mean, in a circle, and everyone's pulling them in different directions. And so what I would say is like removing emotion from your decision making is what's so complex about that is not only has someone given you advice, they've tied emotion to it. And generally, if you're getting advice from someone, you probably like them, or you're their friend, or you look up to them in some way, shape, or form. And even at the most basic level of starting or getting funding, I feel like there's a level of get advice, but don't tie emotionally to the philosophical fight, should I get funding or should I not? What does it mean? What does that communicate to the people after me? What kind of example does that set? You kind of need to stop doing that and just understand what is it that will put you in the best position day to day, both for the business and your own peace of mind. Because sometimes really good advice takes us it doesn't let us sleep at night. And sometimes it's okay to not take that advice because life is infinite, and like to follow stoicism, like life is infinite, right? And you can make any decision you like as long as you are making it that where you think is the best decision. Yes, there will be thousands of people who move you in every which way. Some might be altruistic, some might have their own some people might have their own agenda at hand, but you got to remove that philosophical, emotional side of it and just make the decision you make, and don't feel bad about it. Like accepting people's advice and making decisions, you don't have any obligation to anybody but yourself, right? And then when you let people's advice and philosophical views, tear you apart, it also is like, it is also your decision to let it eat you up, right? So it's kind of like one of those, when you boil stoicism into entrepreneurship, I like to think of it even in the initial entrepreneurship stages. How you get into it will dictate the rest of your business life in that startup, wherever it might be. And it'd be best for you to start early to try and be able to be your own filter of advice, emotions, and controlling how you're interacting with everything.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, just to try to add a little bit to that, I mean, if you have more of like a stoic philosophy about you, you'll be able to filter out that advice and figure out what parts of that advice actually will help you achieve your goals that you have, because you're not dependent on your emotions and how much you like somebody and that you want to do what they say they're doing. Because people who are giving advice, I mean, they have, like you were saying, multiple different motivations for giving that advice. It could be to stroke their own ego. It could be because they are being completely altruistic and this is what worked for them. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're responsible again for what you do, and that is what you have control over.
Sorry, I want you, as you were saying that, I wanted to kind of wrap up what I was thinking with a statement you said earlier. Ryan Holiday has the book called "Ego is the Enemy," and Buddhist books talk a lot about ego and suffering. What I think a big part of that is, whatever you and I just said, if you're listening to this and you're wondering like, I don't know if I deal with this. I think there is some value in proverbially looking in the mirror and understanding how many decisions you make because of ego. And what I mean by that is like, people think of ego as like, oh, the spotlight's on me and I want attention. I don't do that. I don't post on social media. Yes, that is a dimension, but there's a large part of ego that we don't realize affects us. For example, everyone has someone in their life that they don't really like, whatever the reason might be. And you'll find a lot of the actions you take are always the opposite of someone you don't like because you don't like them, and you will do anything to be their opposite to make sure that you so that you can show yourself that you're different from them. And that is a classic ego issue, because you shouldn't think of people as your enemies, but if you want to take the art of war, Sun Tzu's Art of War, you should know your enemies best. And if they're doing something smart, you shouldn't not do it because you don't like them. And that's a classic ego thing that gets in the way.
Yeah, that was Pat in North Africa with Rommel. I mean, he read all the books that Rommel wrote and knew Rommel's motivations probably better than Rommel did. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely, there's a lot in that. And just real quick, one last thing. I know you talked about how life is infinite. There was actually a book, I forget who wrote it, but it's called The Infinite Game. And it's kind of about reconceptualizing how we go about doing things and looking at life. And, again, I mean, this is, we basically talked about stoicism for 25 minutes now. But I mean, another thing that I've gotten from reading up on this stuff is that, I mean, just take any issue that you have and think of it in terms of how it matters from a more infinite perspective. No matter what it is, no matter how big it is, you divide anything by infinity and it's basically, it's zero.
Correct.
Right. So, and this isn't to mean that, I mean, if you're sick, if you have cancer, if you have the coronavirus, that it's not, something that is going to dramatically, harm your life, because of course it is. And it's no way trying to minimize that, but like for business decisions and, when somebody pisses you off, just, take a step back and think of it in terms of that it's not that big of a deal. And it helps you focus on what's really important.
Yeah, if I could, I know we're running late on time. If I could just insert my perspective on it too, is I've been heavily reading some Buddhist books, and they're all authored by a woman named Pema Chodron, I think her name is, and she talks a lot about how like the exact same thing. Life is infinite, so when you're zooming out, nothing seems so serious. And I think when people first initially hear that, I think they think, are you telling me my life means nothing? And I think if you, there's no way like Travis or myself on this talk is going to be able to communicate the meanings of these books or what they're trying to communicate. But I think there is a thought exercise that is worth it, where you go and look into this kind of stuff, where you say like, hey, life is infinite, so let me think about my place in the world. And I think the more you do it, what you come to realize actually is there's a lot of little things that bug you that it will help you not be so obsessed about these little things that really affect your day-to-day mood and your happiness. And there's a lot of things that you don't think about, like for example, other people's getting sick, other people suffering, where to be honest, like you don't think about it, but after you zoom out, you start to think about it more, and you actually develop more empathy and more, I don't know, just like being a good emotional citizen to other people, because you're going through it and you're seeing the scope. So I can't communicate it on this call, but I think like, Travis was saying, and I think you hit it right on the head, there is a lot of value, but by just saying it, you're not going to get it. You kind of have to keep doing the reps of the mental exercise, and you'll kind of see what we're talking about once you kind of go through that.
Yeah, I think I'll try to add my 2 cents into this, hopefully well. I think that there can be, if you only know Stoicism, like at a surface level, there can be some sort of descent into nihilism that could happen. And at the beginning of this whole coronavirus pandemic, one of the pieces that I saw was from this astronaut. I forget what her name was, but she basically, I think she posted a picture of the universe online and said, hey, just remember that when compared to the universe, you're meaningless. And I saw that and I was like, oh, that's really a shitty message kind of to give out, because, okay, you are like, if you or I, nuked the moon or Mars or blew up a solar system, as far as the universe is concerned, yeah, they wouldn't care. So even if we did something that is well out of the reach of what we can do, it doesn't matter. But when you scale it back and you just focus on what you can actually have control over, you can have a huge impact on the people around you, your family, your friends, your coworkers, everybody else. So if you focus more on what you can do internally and what you do as a person, and focus on, being a positive contributor to society, I think you could have a tremendous impact. And I think that's one of the things that I've gotten from Stoicism.
Yeah, I think that was perfect.
All right, buddy. This is normally the 20 minutes with the title, but we're pushing on the 30-minute mark. I'll probably keep the title just for SEO reasons, but thank you very much, Jason. Is there anything else?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I'm a recurring guest usually for entrepreneurship stuff, so you can probably find other things that we've discussed. But if you want to come visit my business or what we do, you can go to zupo.co. That's zupo.co, and you can find any information you like about myself or what we do there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much, sir. That's it from us.